This year's Washington Commanders 8-man roster proves the new regime is prioritizing their specific culture and scheme. All of that right now on Locked On Commanders.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Commanders. I am David Harrison, your guy on the ground covering the Washington Commanders for WUSA 9, your CBS affiliate in the DMV. And I'm right here with you 5 days a week. You can also find me writing about the Commanders for Sports Illustrated's CommanderGameDay.com. Follow me on X at DHarrison82. I want to thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listen today and every day, and to the everydayers who come through for every episode. A special thank you goes out to you today and every day. If this is your first time coming through the show, welcome. Hopefully you like what you hear and you come back again real soon. Coming up on today's episode, we are breaking down the Washington Commanders' initial 53-man roster. We're going to talk about what it means for the culture. We're going to talk about the trenches, shortcomings, strengths, and we're going to talk about some surprises to get it all started. All of that coming on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Football season is right around the corner. Visit the FanDuel app today and start planning your futures bets now. The most telling part of any cut down day is the individual surprises. So when the Washington Commanders revealed their initial 53-man roster, let's run through it real quick. You're not going to be able to memorize all these names, things like that, but certainly there's stories out there. I've got one on WUSA9.com. Commanders.com obviously has one as well. But Jaden Daniels, Marcus Mariota, Josh Johnson are your quarterbacks. Austin Eckler, Chris Rodriguez Jr., Ja'Cory Croskey-Merritt, Jeremy McNichols are your running backs. 5 wide receivers, Terry McLaurin, Deebo Samuel, Noah Brown, Luke McCaffrey, Jalen Lane. 4 tight ends, Zach Ertz, John Bates, Ben Sinnott, Colson Yankoff. 9 O-linemen, Laramie Tunsil, Brandon Coleman, Tyler Biadasz, Andrew Wiley, Chris Paul, Nick Allegretti, Josh Connerly Jr., George Fant, and Trent Scott. Now, important to remember here, or important to know, Sam Cosmi is going to start the season on the physically unable to perform list, which means he has to automatically miss the first 4 games of the season. Remember, we talked about that. I kind of mentioned it's great that he even was possibly going to return for week 1. It kind of made it hard, before week 3 is kind of where I put it. But obviously the team, he's going to miss at least the first 4 weeks, but potentially a return in week 5. On the defensive side of things, 3 defensive ends, Dietrich Wise Jr., Dorrance Armstrong, Javonte Jean-Baptiste, 4 D tackles, Daron Payne, Eddie Goldman, Javon Kinlaw, Jerzon Johnny Newton, 8 linebackers. This is outside linebackers and off-ball inside linebackers. Von Miller, Bobby Wagner, Frankie Luvu, Jacob Martin, Jordan McGee, Nick Bellore, Kane Madrano, and Ale Cajo. I got to get better at saying his name correctly. Cornerbacks, 5 of them: Marshawn Lattimore, Mikey Sainristil, Jonathan Jones, Noah Igbenogany, and Trey Amos. Safeties: Will Harris, Quan Martin, Percy Butler, Jeremy Reeves, Tyler Owens. Your specialist to round out the 53, Tress Way is your punter. Of course, Matt Gay is your kicker. Tyler Ott is your long snapper. So that's the 53. The biggest surprise there for me, only 5 wide receivers. That was the biggest kind of stunning point. I went ahead and predicted 4 running backs on this active roster. To be truthful, and I think I might have alluded to it. I don't know if I really stated it boldly. Every day, you'll have to remind me and let me know. But I've kind of been on this 4 running back kick for a while now. Like it was early in the offseason that I got into a 4 running back kick. It just, when you look at the Washington Commanders and the way that they went through running backs and the amount of times they had to call up Chris Rodriguez Jr. last year and then put him back down, call him up, end up signing him to the active roster, having to waive him, put him back on it was just a mess. And I just felt like it's the position that everybody knows has the least amount of shelf life in the NFL. I just felt like this team, it would just be smart to go through with 4 running backs. Now, if you're going to pay Paul, you have to rob Peter, right? I think that's the saying, rob Peter to pay Paul. And Peter, in this case for me, was the tight end room. I left Colson Yankoff off of my 53-man roster projection because I thought that's probably where they would take in order to add the running back. Instead, they end up taking from the wide receiver room, leaving 5 wide receivers. That is my biggest surprise of this 53-man roster that we saw. It's a strategic decision, right? But it puts a ton of pressure on the health and performance of those top 5 guys. And Terry McLaurin missing training camp, I have no doubt in my mind that he's been working and and taking care of his body, doing all those things. But as we've always talked about, football health is a little bit different, right? Football conditioning is a little bit different than regular conditioning. So, hopefully nothing comes of that. Noah Brown looks healthy again. You've seen the videos, you've seen the tweets. We talked about it here. Noah Brown looking really healthy, running routes before the final preseason game. Obviously didn't play in it, but he's looked healthy. I've seen him running a couple times, seen him catching a couple times before practice. He looks healthy. We'll see if he can actually play. It would indicate that there's only 5 receivers that he probably play. And then, of course, you got the rookie Jalen Lane, who's going to go through an NFL schedule for the first time. Debo has had injury history in the past, and Luke McCaffrey, he's been relatively healthy. So hopefully he can stay that way. So it puts a little bit of pressure on those groups. But I think that really what this speaks on is to the scheme, which we'll get to here in a little bit. More 2 tight end sets, 2 running back sets. Don't be surprised to see a lot more of those than maybe we have in the past to just kind of continue to evolve the offense, so to speak. The surprise keep, I think you've got 2 players that are going to surprise some people as being kept on the roster. One of them is offensive lineman Chris Paul. The other one being undrafted free agent linebacker Ale Cajo. I think you're rewarding performance and you're taking the upside, right? You're taking the risk on the upside. And it's really interesting. We've talked about this team kind of being all in the offseason, trading for Debo, trading for Laramie Tunsil, the oldest team in the National Football League, going out there and getting Von Miller, doing all these things, doing things that teams that are all in on winning it right now do. But then you also see them do this, where they take a guy who's, I would say, relatively unproven in Chris Paul. Like, he's been around for a little bit, right? But has never really kind of flashed as a potential, serious offensive lineman on this team. And then you got undrafted linebacker Ale Cajo, who, really kind of came on very strong there towards the end of camp, towards the end of the preseason. He's someone that we really honed in on going into that final preseason game, and then especially coming out of it. I mean, the dude played lights out. But it was interesting. You guys saw some of you saw the short that I put out there on social media and on YouTube of the interview with Ale. And I put out another short once he made the roster. Once I found out he was making the roster, I created that short, dropped it as soon as the roster dropped. And what you don't see is when I asked him for the interview in the first place, he was surprised. Like, he really did not expect any media member to be wanting to talk to him. And it just kind of shows you how quietly he's been kind of flying under the radar. I think Chris Paul has been really interesting because he's a guy that, I've talked about it on the show before, like all the requisite skills. He's big enough. He's nimble enough. He's got the hands enough, the feet enough. I just never saw enough dog out of him. I just never saw that aggression out of him, that physicality. And I think we saw a lot more of that this training camp and this preseason. And I was really happy to see it because Chris is a good dude. Got to give some praise to Zach Shelby of commanders.com. I know he's a team employee, so he's got to say good stuff. But not only does he say good stuff about Chris Paul, he actually means good stuff about Chris Paul. We have a lot of candid sideline conversations I'm not going to dive into too much here, but believe me, Zach Shelby has always believed that Chris Paul had that skill set. And I've always just pushed back and been like, yeah, man, but I want to see a little bit more dog and I need to see more aggression. We finally started to see some of that here this training camp. So hopefully that continues and Chris Paul gets a little bit more of that dog in him as we continue moving forward. So those are the 2 kind of surprise keeps, surprise cuts. I'll be honest with you, I don't know if there was any real surprises. I know some of the insiders were surprised when I texted them that Clelin Ferrell had gotten cut. I wasn't surprised. I didn't have him on my initial 53-man roster projection either. And truthfully, Clelin was a guy that coming out of last season, I really kind of thought probably wouldn't even be back when he was brought back. If you remember when he was re-signed kind of late in the cycle. So it still kind of felt to me more like, all right, like we got to flesh out this roster. And also we've got a relationship with you. So we'll kind of do you a solid as well. Like you put some tape on and that's pretty much what he is. Clelin, I kind of feel like Clelin was set up for failure a little bit entering the NFL. The Raiders drafted him to be this like pass rusher / run stopping hybrid and just never was going to be that guy. You're like, run stopping is really his biggest thing. But then the NFL tried to keep him small, keep him slender, keep him athletic and agile. And it just hurt his ability to set the edge, which is the thing that he did the best, I think, coming out of college anyway. And just, it just kind of is what it is. But I think this is 100% a football decision. So it's not a veteran decision. You see there's relationships here, right? Cleveland goes back to San Francisco with Adam Peters, but it doesn't matter. This Washington Commanders squad is looking for their kind of guys that fit the scheme, that fit the culture. We've seen that with the trade of Brian Robinson Jr. We've seen that with the trade of Jahan Dotson, Emmanuel Forbes. All these moves that have happened have been culture based. The team knows who they want to be, and they know the kind of guy that fits what they want to be. So all those surprising moves, there are some roster questions still remaining as we get through this initial 53-man roster. We'll get into that next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And this episode of Locked On Commanders is brought to you in part by Yahoo Fantasy. The NFL season is right around the corner. With all these roster moves today, you can feel the buzz. Fantasy football season is here. Everyone's researching, drafting, and building their championship squads. This year, I'm playing fantasy football on Yahoo Fantasy, and you should too. Whether it's your first time or it's your millionth league, after seeing the Commanders keep only 5 wide receivers, you have to wonder who the real fantasy sleeper is. With Chris Paul and Ale Cajo making the team, it shows that anything can happen. That's what makes fantasy so great. You get to be the GM, the decision maker. You get to decide if you believe in the youth movement or if you want the veterans. You're going to pick up a surprise player that gets cut in your league like Clelin Ferrell. He's not going to be the guy you pick up, but you get the point. Yahoo Fantasy is loaded with fun ways to compete and brand new features that make the game even better. Want to try something new and intense? Check out the Guillotine League mode, where the lowest scoring team gets cut each week, or you can get your crew together and go head-to-head in a classic private league. The new NFL season kicks off September 4th, so don't wait. Start your league now. Draft now at yahoofantasy.com/lockedonnfl. That's yahoofantasy.com/lockedonnfl. For all the good stories from today, the final roster does leave 2 remaining question marks on both sides of the ball. Obviously, our biggest surprise, the 5 wide receivers, is a little bit of a question all by itself. Got some ideas on that potentially that we'll talk about here later on in the episode. But I think if you have 2 roster question marks, just generally speaking from the roster, I think your first question mark has to be about the front 7, right? The decision was made on the defensive line and the linebackers. There's a fascinating blend of high risk, high reward players on the defensive front 7 when you look at this initial 53-man roster. And when you get to the linebacker depth, you obviously have the starting duo of Bobby Wagner and Frankie Louvu. You know, Frankie's a little bit of that, off-ball linebacker, but also outside linebacker for them when they need him. Bobby Wagner's that steady off-ball linebacker. And you obviously, knock on wood, hope it never has to come up. But what if one or both of those guys ends up going down, missing time, whether even a series in a close game, who's going to step up? Jordan McGee has obviously flashed in his abilities to get on the field. Nick Bellore is a veteran, but what can he bring to the defense? Kane Medrano, even Ale Cajo came on strong. Like, these guys are unproven, right? So it's not that you don't like the depth. It's not that you don't like the players behind Bobby Wagner and Frankie Louvu, but if you're being honest about it, there's just not a lot of proven, right? It's a lot of excitement, but not a lot of intangible or tangible, I should say, quantifiable performance-based opinions and expectations based on that depth chart. And then when you get to the defensive line, right? Because again, this is all front 7 stuff, right? Deron Payne. The question has been, like, we've heard the stories from the coaching staff behind the scenes, great leader in the locker room, in the meeting rooms, on the field, even all that stuff, and that's amazing. But the proof is in the pudding. What are we going to see on the field? Eddie Goldman. A lot of people came out of the preseason not all that excited about Eddie Goldman. I get it. I still think that he's basically brought in to be a space eater, a run stopper, in the sense that he's not going to necessarily make all the tackles or even penetrate the backfield. He's just going to make sure the offensive line can't do a whole lot of things they want to try to do. And in that role, if that is his role, then I can see why the team would keep him. Javon Kinlaw has been impressive in short spurts. Johnny Newton has had some good moments as well. So we'll see how they continue to develop. But again, a lot of question marks on how is this going to get used? How is it all going to come together? And then the DNs, Dietrich Wise Jr. look strong. How much of a pass rusher can he be? Dorrance Armstrong, can he continue to get better at closing versus just getting pressures? And then Javonte Jean-Baptiste has been injured the last couple of weeks of training camp, missing preseason action, all that stuff. So, there's still going to be some question marks about him as a young player. So just up and down the board for whatever, in various different varieties, you have questions remaining about this front 7. And I think it's going to kind of last all year. I'm not saying there's going to be a weak unit, but I think that when we get to the offseason, we're still going to have questions about this front 7, whether it be the longevity of it, the depth behind the starters, or whether or not there needs to be upgrades made at specific positions. The second question that I think is remaining after this initial 53-man roster has been revealed really is the same question that everybody's been asking since it first came out that Brian Robinson Jr. was being shopped in a trade. And that is, who is RB1? And I think the better question is there an RB1, right? I don't even know that there necessarily is a lead back in this room. I think Austin Eckler clearly is the leader of the room, right? The veteran, he's been around the block, all that stuff. But if you remember, when Austin Eckler got here in the first place, one of the reasons he said he left the Los Angeles Chargers in free agency is because they were looking for a bell cow type of back, a guy that could really carry the majority of the workload and not kind of need to be spelled and all that stuff. And Austin said, that's not my game. That's just not me. I'm a guy that needs to be part of an effective 1-2 combination. Last year, he was the 2 in that 1-2, right? Brian Robinson Jr. was the 1. Austin Eckler was the 2, third down back, whatever you want to call him. Receiving threat, certainly has some pass blocking ability, right? But, more of a receiver type of guy, things like that. Is he going to be all of a sudden this bell cow for this, Cliff Kingsbury offense? I doubt that's what he's looking to do. You also have the fact that he's been back there with Deebo Samuel as like the primary kick returner. So if he's going to do that duty and running back duty, he's an older dude, how fast is he going to break down? Then you've got the redemption story of sorts, right? Chris Rodriguez Jr., a player that was cut from this roster at this point in time last year, brought back on the practice squad, ended up bouncing back and forth from the active roster to the practice squad again, performs whenever he gets the opportunity into. I got a lot of insiders they're very, very big fans of Chris. My affinity of Chris as a ball player has been well documented on this show. I've never hidden that. I've always thought that he was maybe a little bit underrated. But this offseason, Anthony Lynn, his coaching staff, gave him a challenge. They said, we want you to come back slimmer, more slender, more agile, more able to kind of be explosive, do all those things. And he worked his tail off down there in Georgia with his trainer, Lily, and got that weight off. I remember first time I saw him at OTA practice, like, hold up, dude, I had to check the roster to make sure that was still him, because I was like, man, like you're melting away out here. And he was really proud and really excited about the progress he had made with his body. And I think it's really shown in some of the work he's done this preseason. So really proud of him, really excited for him. But again, is he going to be the bell cow? I don't necessarily think that's the role you're just going to hand over to him right away. Ja'Cory Croskey-Merritt, Bill, the exciting rookie phenom, is, great vision. I love the fact this dude can cut without losing a step. And I think that most people would agree he's probably the guy with the biggest upside, right? He's the guy that, if you talk about ceilings, his ceiling is certainly the highest for this team and for himself. But again, is he ready as a 7th-round rookie to take this big leap into the NFL? He still needs work. He still needs reps. I was told that, if it wasn't for his shoulder injury that he's been dealing with since the New England Patriots game, that he probably would have played that 3rd preseason game. Actually, I think Dan Quinn even said that in the press conference, so it may not just be something I was quote unquote told. It's just one of those situations where, you love the excitement, you love the upside, but I don't think it's a 1-for-1 transaction. I don't think it's a Brian Robinson's out, Ja'Cory Croskey-Merritt is in. And then you have Jeremy McNichols, the steady veteran who's kind of been around the game for a long time, brings a good amount of work, but doesn't necessarily do anything superbly great. I think at the end of the day, it's a rotation in the beginning. I think that Cliff Kingsbury starts the season with a game plan. We think that you attack this defense that the New York Giants, for example, are going to bring against us the best. And then as you get into the game, who's hot, right? If Chris Rodriguez is out there, 6 carries through the first quarter, averaging 4.2 yards per carry. Ja'Cory's got 5 carries, and he's averaging 3.1 yards per carry. I think you see a heavier dose of Chris in the second half. If the numbers are flipped, you see more Ja'Cory, right? I just think that's probably how this is going to go. I have an insider who has a bold prediction that Chris Rodriguez is going to rush for over 1,000 yards this season. I would love to see it, but I'll tell you, as of today, 53-man roster reveal day, I don't have a clear picture of what the running back room is going to look like from a usage standpoint. We will start to get our first glimpse of that Wednesday. We have our first in-season practice on Wednesday, so I'll give you a little bit more on that tomorrow on our next episode. But for now, those are the 2 questions that I have biggest remaining on this roster after the initial 53-man roster reveal. While those questions are valid, I think they all point back to a clear philosophy in this front office and in this building that the work is not finished yet. I mean, is it really ever? We're going to talk about that next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This episode of Locked On Commanders is brought to you in part by FanDuel. The NFL season is almost here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer right now. If you are a new customer at FanDuel, you can bet just $5, and if that bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use anywhere on the app. Let's say that again. One $5 bet. If you're new to FanDuel, you win that $5 bet. It could be on literally anything. You get $300 in bonus bets that you can then use on anything. I love using FanDuel because it's however you like to bet, you get to bet. Player props, they got them. Same game parlays, that's my jam. They got them. You can even jump in on live bets as the action unfolds. I love doing that in the NBA because I like to get a feel for the game before I start putting money down. So I get a feel for the flow of the game. Then I put money on what I think is going to happen. So if you're ready to play, download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com and get started today. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bets. you can't truly judge a roster until you understand the blueprint behind it and the moves that are still to possibly come. Every roster tells a story about the philosophy of the people who build it, specifically general manager Adam Peters, but also head coach Dan Quinn has a massive say. His coaching staff obviously has a say. Assistant general manager Lance Newmark has a say in this, right? They're all telling a story. And this one to me screams versatility on defense and a commitment to rewarding hunger on offense. It's not enough to just want the ball. You got to want the opportunity to perform, right? A positionless D-line. We talked about this before, like positionless basketball, right? Clelin Ferrell, that cut makes you kind of see the plan just a little bit. He's kind of isolated. There's one thing he really does very well, but this defense is built with guys that are all have the capability of being multiple. You look at Javon Kinlaw, who can play inside, he can play outside. Jacob Martin is going to play as an outside linebacker. He's also going to play with his hand in the dirt. You get this hybrid defense where, you know what, we might have 3 dudes on the line of scrimmage, 3 snaps in a row, but every single time the 3 dudes on there are going to be different. And what that signifies is that the rush is going to be different. The covers are going to be different. Like, it looks the same, but it's actually very complete different types of defenses with these guys. Then you look at the running back room, and you've got the versatility there as well. You got Austin Eckler, who's more of a shimmy shake catching, type of running back. Ja'Cory Croskey-Merritt has a little bit of a blend of all of that. I think a little bit more of an inside run ability than Austin Eckler does. Chris Rodriguez still has that power between the tackles, between the guards, all that stuff. He's got a little bit more burst than Jeremy McNichols is a similar type of back as well. And the rewarding guys. You go out there, we tell you to go out there and hunt down a goal. You reach that goal, we're going to reward you with touches. Chris Rodriguez is an example of that. Ja'Cory Croskey-Merritt is an example of that. Doesn't matter. You're a 3rd-round pick a few years ago. Everybody loves you. Fan favorite coming out to 50 Cent, all that stuff. If you don't deliver on what we're asking you to do from a culture standpoint, it's just not going to work out. So I think that's incredibly interesting and a very poignant message, to send to this roster for the guys on the roster now. You look at Ali Cajo, and for the guys that are going to come on the roster in the future. So what's coming next? The next 48 hours, the next week, whatever it is. They're obviously thin at wide receiver. That was, again, the biggest surprise of this initial 53-man roster, but there's some options out there. So rumors coming out on Tuesday morning that the Washington Commanders were seeking out trade partners for corner Igbenogany. You also have reports out there the New England Patriots were looking for a trade partner for wide receiver Kendrick Bourne. Well, I don't know the Patriots as well as I know the Commanders, obviously, but if they could use a corner that plays physical and likes to attack, maybe you do a 1-for-1. Noah Igbenogany to New England for a wide receiver like Kendrick Bourne. I had an insider that expressed some interest and belief that maybe Adam Peters was going to go after Marquez Valdez-Scantling, who was a free agent now. That's an interesting option. Trey Palmer is a guy out of Tampa that I liked a lot with the Buccaneers, but in a really, just heavily stacked wide receiver room there in Tampa. Can certainly see why they were able to let him go. Maybe he comes in and can help out this offense. Kind of does the same thing that Jalen Lane does, to be quite honest with you. So I'm not really sure if they have a need for that, but just some names out there. Then, of course, you have the practice squad. In the next 24 hours, we're going to learn who's going to make this first iteration of the practice squad. Up to 16 guys. There's some, classifications on veterans and how many games you played and all that stuff. But I think Sam Hartman, he was on the practice squad last year. It just depends on how much they believe in his development. He's a Jaden guy. Like, Jaden loves him. So obviously, there's a benefit there. But, as far as the player, if the team believes that there's still developmental, potential to tap into there, certainly could see him back. Defensive end Andre Jones Jr. and Jalen Holmes, I think they certainly have the potential to be back on the practice squad as well. Carl Davis and Sheldon Day, D tackles, both of them potentially have the room to come back. Linebacker Duke Riley, I don't think he was brought in here for no reason. And when we talk about the linebacker depth and the lack of experience in the linebacker depth, Duke Riley has that experience, so he can be kind of that mentor in the room as well while he's on the practice squad, getting up to speed with Joey Jr.'s defense. And then you never know. If you need him, you have him there on hand. So just a few names to watch. I think cornerback Carlin Viggers is probably going to come back. Wide receiver Ja'Cory Brooks also probably going to come back. There's really a lot of good options here for the Washington Commanders to flesh out their practice squad in the next 24 hours. And then, of course, you also have TJ Muranyanga, the international pathway player. I thought he did pretty good for himself given his lack of experience. So, he'll be around for a while as well. Does not count against the practice squad or the roster limit either way. That's going to do it for today's episode, our breakdown of the initial 53-man roster. Next time on Locked On Commanders, we will be speaking post-practice and post-press conference. Adam Peters and Dan Quinn speaking to us about this roster. Then we're going to get to see it on the practice field. And we're going to talk to Terry McLaurin on Wednesday afternoon, Wednesday evening. So lots of good stuff to come next time on Locked On Commanders. In the meantime, if you got questions or comments, you can text them directly to me by becoming a Locked On Commanders insider at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. Fantasy draft season is here. You may have drafted already. You may not have drafted already. If you haven't, check out Locked On Fantasy Football to get your strategy set. If you have, check out Locked On Fantasy Football to see what these free agent moves have, what the ripple effects are, and where your trade baits could possibly lie. Find Locked On Fantasy Football on YouTube or wherever you're listening to this podcast. To the everydayers, I see you every day. I appreciate you every day. I'm going to give you a special thank you once again for coming through today. Until next time, stay safe, be kind to one another. We'll talk again real soon right here on Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.